Hey everyone, my name is Harry Tormey. I'm the CTO of StepChange.work, and today I'm going to be talking to Justin Watt. Justin runs a automation company called Switchboard. Uh, I'm talking to Justin because Justin's the type of person that StepChange would focus on working with if we were brought into a company where they had a messy data setup, but they want to achieve some automation goals. So we would hand off the automation part to Justin, and we would clean up the data layer to get it ready for him to do his work. But Justin, enough about me rambling on. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you and Switchboard do?
Sure, yeah. We come into businesses and try to understand, how are they working and try to improve that on both the process and people side and change management side. And then, like you said, overall focusing on the technical implementation of automation, AI, and all that fun stuff to streamline processes, workflows, and all the stuff that people don't love doing day to day.
That's pretty awesome. And Justin, tell me a little bit about your background.
Sure. I went to university for psych thinking I wanted to spend a career sitting in rooms with people one on one for 40 years, hearing about their challenges, which I guess in a way I do now, but I quickly realized that was not a career path I wanted to pursue. So while I was in university, I worked up here in Canada at a big telco called Shaw, which is kind of Canada's Verizon kind of thing. And got to see the inner workings of a multi-billion-dollar company, and it just fascinated me. And I spent a lot of time, working with Excel and numbers and all that fun stuff, which wasn't, quite the career path I wanted, but it gave me a taste of things. So then moved over to IBM working on kind of large infrastructure projects with government and got to learn a lot there about, a place that size, the red tape has red tape. So a lot of learnings on what to do, but also what not to do when it comes to building out process and working with teams and getting things implemented. And then from there, after a couple of years, went to a product agency called MetaLab, which at that time when I joined, we were 30 or 40 folks, and joined to help kind of scale up the project management team. So at first, client facing, running projects with everything from really cool startups to working with teams like Amazon. Got to work on Amazon Photos and work with Uber and be in their offices. And then we hired as we scaled. When I left, we were close to 200 people and left after about 8 years. So that first couple of years was kind of client facing, and then working in operations. When we got to about 60 or 80 people, we brought on this wonderful COO who she took me under her wing and taught me her ways. So moved into operations, and by the time I left, was running kind of day-to-day business operations and leading a team there on ops, IT, resource management. For some reason, they let me run marketing for a couple of years. But then after almost 8 years, that ran its course, learned a lot, but wanted to go out on my own and started automation agency.
That's absolutely amazing. And MetaLab had some really big, prestigious products. And it's great that someone, with that product background like you has decided to start an automation company. So tell me a little bit about Switchboard and its evolution.
Yeah, so I started kind of solo as a solo founder, one person shop, called it Stakeholders, working specifically with SMBs. After working with large enterprises for so long, I just loved working with startups more than anything. So working with small teams who gave a damn and were, in the work each day, but like any startup, they hit those plateaus of their ambitions couldn't be met when they only have so many people. So working with smaller teams, and then after about a year, growing that team and growing the clientele, brought on a co-founder, and we rebranded to Switchboard as kind of a both on the legal and ethically. It just felt right to kind of rebrand, and if you're gonna have a co-founder, having it as a thing that we're actually co-founding together. So we started Switchboard a little while ago, and now we are doing the same thing, working with companies of call it 50 to 250 people, and working with them to implement automation.
That's awesome. And can you give me an example of maybe one type of problem that you see with those SMBs?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we experience is, I think a lot of companies as they're growing, they don't think about their process. So, we come in and we look at things with them and do the classic consulting of sitting down with people in the company, getting access to all their tools and data, and coming back to them and saying, a quick example is maybe how they onboard people or their sales process. Oftentimes it's 30 steps that's happening to onboard a new hire, and could those 30 steps be 20, and of those 20 could half or more be automated. And so that's the kind of thing that we come in and work with them on.
Yeah, and that's like, a real time saving for someone whose time is probably quite valuable, right? Like, having to onboard, never mind the actual the feeling of this being a smooth, well-oiled process as opposed to kind of like the chaos of onboarding lots of people at a fast-growing startup, and all of these kind of parts of the process being all over the place. So definitely get the value in doing that. Um, so kind of, one of the things I'd love you to kind of talk us through is maybe an engagement with a customer, starting from how you came into contact with that customer through to some of the work that you did to them, because I think that's a very interesting part of your story.
Yeah, I think I don't come from a sales background, and I don't love the hard sales and of running an agency. So I've just tried to kind of share what we're up to, and the things that we work on publicly on Twitter and LinkedIn and all that fun stuff. And that's led to a lot of cool reach outs from people. A good example, I think, is a VP of Ops at a startup reached out in the Twitter DMs and just said, "Hey, saw what you're doing. Can we chat about how that could apply to what we're up to?" And so hopped on a call with this person, and I'm smiling because just instantly we gelled and understood. I think a lot of people, when they're growing up, there's the dream jobs of, I want to be an astronaut or lawyer or a doctor. Like, no one spends their time growing up thinking, I want to move data around spreadsheets all day, or reply to emails telling people status updates all day. And so we chatted about all the different kind of growth pains that they were going through process wise. And we landed on starting with their HR team and kind of focusing on their onboarding because they were scaling up fairly quickly. And that example, it was one kind of going back to that, could 30 steps be 20, that kind of thing. They had an onboarding process that they had just kind of built the airplane as it was taking off, so to speak. And so when someone would sign an offer letter, within a couple days, they would get emails from, I think it was 6 or 7 different people with, can you fill this payroll form out? Can you fill this tax information out? Can you fill out this personal information for sending swag or getting you set up on benefits, all that fun stuff. And then another set of emails to say, hey, I'm your manager, or this is what your first week looks like, all that fun stuff. And then IT also reaching out to say, we're going to send you a laptop. Can you provide this information so we can set up your accounts? And so that was kind of the starting point of our work together of streamlining all that, which we can go into in more depth if you'd like, but that's a good
No,
example.
I think that's a really great example. And I think one of the things that drew me to Justin was a reply that he made on a thread about basically things that block automation at startups. And when I went and I looked at Justin's website, they do a really great job of putting together short form video articulating the things that they do, which is automating stuff like the onboarding journey that Justin just described. And so I think, when you were telling me this story before we spoke in this interview, the VP of operations saw the video, reached out to you. You guys had a call. You listed out a bunch of different problems that needed automation help. You landed at this, onboarding new employees kind of workflow problem, which was going to be a huge problem because they needed to scale up massively the amount of employees they have, a classic startup story. So tell me, like, okay, you have this talk with this VP. Do they just give a mandate and the person goes, did it? What's the process from there to actually getting a contract and talking to the stakeholders and doing all of that? Can you walk me through that part of the journey, Justin?
Yeah, I think a lot of agencies come in and just try to scope out a giant project and treat it as, this project-based scoping that by the time you sign a contract and get to a kickoff with someone, the business has changed, the people have changed, the desires for focus on improvement has changed. And so I learned very quickly to move to a retainer model. And so what we do is just kind of on a monthly retainer, build out a roadmap with them in that first few weeks together after understanding the people and the business and the technology and all that fun stuff, and then work through that roadmap together. And so with this client, as an example, that first couple of weeks was getting access to their tools and understanding, the silos of data. As a good example, I think with this client, had, I think it was like 3 or 4 different spreadsheets of just information on each employee. And this is why someone would get all these different emails, because the left hand wasn't talking to the right on, hey, can we grab this information and have it in a central place so that everyone who needs it to be able to onboard someone has access to it. And instead, what they were doing was everyone had their own spreadsheets of information, their own tools that none of them were connected, none of them talked to each other, and there was no kind of source of truth or process that everyone was aligned around for onboarding a new employee. It was kind of everyone had built their own process, which wasn't necessarily bad, but it's not a great employee experience. Like I was talking about, to get 6, 7, 8 emails within 24 to 48 hours of signing an offer letter asking for all this information. And so that was the big learning in coming back to them after a few weeks to say, here's the process as it stands right now. Here's all the ways that we recommend improving it. And that retainer model really helps remove this kind of us going into a black box, disappearing for a couple months and coming back and saying, we scoped it out together, we think this is what you want. And instead, this approach lets us kind of build a roadmap and work through it iteratively, just like you would build a product. I think a lot of teams, whether it's personality driven or KPI driven, for them, they have kind of their own needs and desires of what they want out of a process. And so we try to treat it as a group objective instead of pitting people against each other and saying you're doing this wrong or you could improve and it would make everyone else's lives easier. Try to frame it as all of us against the problem. And in this case, the problem is, how can we make a better experience both internally for onboarding someone and for that new employee, and get them up to speed quicker? Because I'm sure, as you know too, the cost of hiring a new employee, onboarding, training them, getting them effective in their role is way higher than having someone for a longer period of time and retaining them. So in this case, we met with different stakeholders. We met with head of IT, head of HR, a few different department managers to understand what's working, what's not. And so we do these stakeholder interviews, and then on the back of that, we go into Miro as our tool of choice, but there's a million workflow diagramming tools out there, but we map out the process and play it back to them in a Loom. And so we share it with the entire group to say, here's all of our findings and opportunities for you, and here's what we propose as a new streamlined process. And in that Miro, we show them all the automated steps too, so then they can see the light at the end of the tunnel of, oh, we don't have to do it this way. We don't have to send 8 emails that we're manually crafting each time. We don't have to internally kind of chase each other for different pieces of information that inform IT onboarding or HR onboarding or the first kind of 30, 60, 90-day plan for that new hire. We presented it back to them as kind of a unified process with all the data connected in Airtable and collected as a single form that is sent to that new employee. So instead of them filling out these PDFs and replying to all these emails, they get one single form link, and that information that they fill in is added to this Airtable that all the right people have access to. And so when we play it back that way, it moves it from people feeling like they're against each other in terms of process and getting what they want out of it, to it's all of us as a team having a single place to go to. And then on top of that, you start getting to layer in automations that mean that they don't have to do all this manual work and chasing.
So let's kind of get a little bit specific here. So what were the major tools that that needed to be automated in order to streamline this process?
Yeah, so they had an HRIS platform with Greenhouse. They had a ATS platform or for applicant tracking for kind of the interview and kind of onboarding workflow from when someone applies to when they would start. These tools didn't talk to each other. And so we used Airtable to act as a source of truth. And because these tools that they already had great APIs, we could then bring all that information in. So a good example of an automation is that if you view kind of a candidate pipeline like you would a CRM of, you have a meeting and you have an interview and you have an offer letter and all that fun stuff, when they would move someone in that, call it pipeline, into offer letter accepted, that would trigger a bunch of automations that would extract all that information from the ATS, put it into Airtable, and trigger a bunch of automations to send to the head of that department, the head of HR, and the head of IT to say, here's the information you need. These automations have already run to set up certain accounts. And so we would plug those in. For example, this team used Google for Business and they were manually going and creating all these accounts off the back of that with, Okta's tied into a bunch of things. There's a bunch of manual kind of setup that they would have to do in different tools like Slack, and they use Miro, actually, things like that. And so we would automate all of that so
Wow.
that by the time it gets to IT, it is served up to them to say, here's the accounts already created, here's a draft of the messaging to this person, so that they could send them, here's the accounts you've had created, here's your kind of master primary login. And so that alone, just for IT, I think saved them about 2 hours of
Wow.
onboarding. And then from there, we could then customize essentially the onboarding plan at a department level. So we would work with each department to say, what does kind of the first week look like, the first 30 days, 60 days, and they used Asana. And so each new hire would get essentially an Asana project created for them, have their manager added to it, so that by the time that person starts, there's essentially the 30, 60, 90-day plan that is customized to them and their department and their role.
That's really cool. And just for people who are kind of watching and who don't know what Greenhouse and ATS is, Justin, can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so an HRIS platform essentially acts as a source of truth for HR to house, everything from performance reviews to payroll
Hmm.
information, to title, reporting structure, all that fun stuff. And so because the greenhouse in this case is their HRIS has that API, like I was saying, we pulled that into Airtable, and once it's in there, you can do a lot with it because Airtable is so flexible in terms of how you can plug it into other products. And so a follow-on kind of mini project was then working with their finance department to add that person to their payroll system automatically. And so instead of, again, payroll having to go chase all this information, go into their payroll system, set everything up there, again, because it was all brought out of Greenhouse into Airtable as a source of truth, we could then bring it into their payroll system and automatically set up that new
That's
hire.
really awesome. So Sana sounds like a modern company that probably has great APIs. What were kind of some of the things that were like hard because there was no APIs, or just hard because the customer wasn't on the correct plan?
Yeah, the part of our first few weeks when working with a client that I think a lot of teams don't think about is, can our tools even do these things? And so we do a bit of a tool and data audit in our onboarding with new clients. And when we're playing back to them our findings and opportunities, like I was talking about earlier, that loom that we deliver them to say, here's the opportunities in front of you. We also highlight for them, here's your tools and here's the kind of current plans that you're on. Does that current plan support automating stuff? Does it have an API? Does it not? That kind of thing. A good example in this case, and I see it often, is Google has these different tiers in their workspace from, I think they call it starter, all the way up to business and enterprise levels. And you have to be on business for certain features to be unlocked in their API and to be able to automate, say, creating an account. And you have to be at an even higher level in enterprise to automate even more of it. So playing it back to them, they made the decision and agreed with us that, okay, let's upgrade the Google Workspace account to an enterprise level because they were expecting so much growth, and they knew that the extra that they would spend on licensing for Google Workspace would actually end up netting them a big cost savings for the amount of work that we could automate being on that tier. So I think a lot of people don't think about kind of, do we have the right tools that have APIs in the first place? And if not, should we get onto those? Or do we have the right tools, but we're not at kind of the right service level to unlock that, which is, the classic SaaS tax of forcing you into higher
Climb
tiers
the
to get
ladder,
unlock certain
climb that
features.
ladder, man. That's just it's like
Yep.
just like Apple selling you on the slightly better iPads to get the features. SaaS companies do that all the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's the tough thing to stomach for a lot of folks is, oh, this is more outright per month to spend on a license or a seat. But showing them what the value is long term and what that gets them often is that unlock. And sometimes it's not worth it too. That's the thing of, sometimes the SaaS companies are saying, if you're more than 5 users, you have to be on enterprise. It's like, well, there's three other competitors that actually have an API out of the box on any tier. So, maybe let's not use that. A good example that I see often is kind of form tools. Typeform is a good example where I think, yeah, as soon as you hit 6 or so users, they ask you to move on to an enterprise plan to unlock more of it. Whereas, Airtable, Tally, Fillout, those are ones that we often recommend instead because right out of the box they have what you need. You're not forced into these higher tiers and paying more for things that a lot of companies just offer out of the box.
Can you give me a story from this particular engagement where you had to work around basically limitations in the product that you were trying to automate?
The Google Workspace one was a large one. They also had kind of hacked together a few different Excel sheets that didn't talk to each other and were kind of silos of data. And the comfort level that the team had with those Excel sheets was very high, so they are more resistant to that change. And so illustrating to them, how working out of spreadsheets and treating those as a database in a company limits you a ton. And that data not being able to talk to each other or relying on it being manually updated, or more often than not, what's happening is it's not being updated, and then teams are replicating the data in 3 or 4 different spots. That was a big blocker. And so getting them around Airtable was a big unlock to say, you're treating things as a database that are not meant to be treated that way. And so Airtable was a good example where that then unlocked a bunch of stuff for us, because then you've got these kind of interconnected relational databases of information that talks to each other, or more importantly, it will extract data from tools that already houses some of this data, and they can add on to it. So, a good example of this client was the HRIS platform had the address and the t-shirt size and the things for their swag. And so bringing it into Airtable, they could then add on a few more columns to map that to the different swag that they wanted to send out. And it's wild the amount of things that have APIs and automation nowadays. They now essentially have fully automated, after we work with them, their swag side of things. So when a new employee onboards, they know what t-shirt size to send them for the sweatshirt. They know where to send it, and what that employee's preferences are for things when they send out that swag.
So that's absolutely awesome. And I think this is a good point to ask, like, what was the before and after impact of the work that you did, Justin?
Yeah, so the emails that the new employee received went from that 7 or 8 emails from 3 or 4 different people down to a single email that was automated and sent out to them. And so just the sheer amount of kind of communication and chasing internally and with the new employee was cut down. And then I believe the IT team said that they saved about 2 hours per new hire. The HR team saved about 4 hours per new hire. And then the department managers, we didn't quantify it, and I don't recall asking them specifically how many hours they saved. But for them, having that onboarding plan and kind of first 30, 60, 90-day Asana setup saved them a ton of time too. So it was a classic, going back to the could 30 steps be 20? That was one where there was about 20 or 30 steps per department of IT, HR, and the department that person was working in. All of those had 20 or 30 different steps that were cut down significantly, and we automated a bunch of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. I mean, I also think as well, there's that kind of feeling when it's kind of well-oiled, right? Because if you've ever worked at a company before, it starts to kind of pick up and do a lot of hiring. A new hire is this just very crazy kind of, new thing. So I'd imagine the kind of vibes were a lot better, for want of a better word.
Yeah, I remember one of the department managers said that the amount of stress brought on by onboarding that new employee was way higher than the stress of training that new employee. Like once they were there, they could get a grasp on it, but they felt that all the stress was lifted off their shoulders by having all this kind of streamlined, even just knowing what's happening and knowing that it's going to be taken care of. As you said, the vibes were better. And the stress was cut down just knowing that things are being taken care of, whether that is by the robots and by automation, or the fact that we laid out kind of a clear path of what onboarding looks like that everyone could rally around and know, okay, when IT handles this, then I'm unlocked to do, the next steps, and that's just taken care of. So even just knowing what the process is half the
That's
battle.
absolutely amazing. And I suppose, this brings us on to kind of another point, which is, this particular customer sounded like they had like, modern infrastructure. Like, you mentioned G Suite, you mentioned Greenhouse, you mentioned, Asana. You know, can you tell me about like maybe another engagement where things were less than ideal and like what problems that brought up for you?
Yeah, this is a common one, which I'm I want to hear your
Yeah.
take on, because an example that comes to mind is there was a marketing agency that we worked with, and that marketing agency, as many do, they are managing all these different ad accounts and all these different kind of campaigns and content that's going out marketing wise for all of their clients. And so they had over the years kind of hacked together these systems where Meta and Google and anywhere that you're advertising, they have slowly, very slowly added in ways for you to kind of extract the data out of that. And so this team, as they waited for the platforms like the Metas and the Pinterests and Twitter and whatnot to provide information proactively, they had gone around that as much as possible to extract all that data and put it in all these different databases so that they could run all these reports, they could see the performance of what they were doing, and they could share kind of status updates with clients. And so they came to us asking for a lot of help automating more of that because it had just become unreasonable to manage that sheer amount of kind of performance data and ad ROI data for each of their clients. But the challenge was that they had built these on, MySQL databases. They had built it on a couple of Microsoft Access databases, and all of this was stuck in kind of on-prem servers or things that have no APIs. And so it was a bit of a come to Jesus, so to speak, for them of none of these tools talk to each other, and the way that they've been built, it would take a ton of work just to even get them talking to each other. And so we had to have that tough discussion of you kind of need to hit reset on how you're managing your data. Technically they could make it work, but they would spend just as much time kind of modernizing their data infrastructure as it would take to just hit reset and have a bit more of a modern setup that they can access with APIs, and they can automate a lot of their reporting and whatnot too for clients. So that one was a tough pill for them to swallow.
I mean, and this is kind of a common thread that we see is that like we get clients that want to build a new thing, but the foundations have issues, right? So, if you want a nice, shiny, remodeled kitchen, you can't build it on foundations that are crumbling, or else your house is going to fall over and all that work that you've invested into it is going to be super brittle and janky. So in that case, it's kind of a common thing that we've seen, like, doing a lift and shift or consolidating and re-architecting a backend system to make it more amenable, scalable, and performant. And often there's cost savings as well in terms of the billing that you do. So in that particular case, probably what we do is we would go in, map out basically the current architecture, do a similar kind of thing to you, which is basically spend a few weeks talking to the different candidates, understanding, like what the stakeholders' needs are, looking at the source code of their existing applications and coming up with a proposal where basically, hey, we'll take all of this stuff that you have now that's a bit janky. Maybe some of it's on-prem, maybe some of it's using basically different types of relational databases, and we'll basically package this up, maybe on RDS Postgres, and clean up your business logic and get into a great place, and then be there to hand off to someone like you, Justin, who's doing the actual innovative new workflow automation, which is the stuff that you really want to get to. So in the same way that if you were doing a kitchen remodel and you were doing kind of like building it on some kind of like deck that was needed to be blown away, we would be the demolition people who come in, pour the concrete, get it into a really great shape, and then you guys would come in and do basically all the sort of innovative kitchen design and kind of get that up there. And if there was any problems, we're on retainer, and you're going to get a great customer experience with that. So yeah, I mean, it is a common thing that like a company has a new use case they want to do, but the limitations of their old infrastructure, which has served them well, is holding them back from realizing that opportunity.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. I think a lot of execs that I've talked to, and I'm curious your take too, everyone wants these magical dashboards that are real time and updating and showing them all the things that they need to either get ahead of challenges or to be proactive on, recommending solutions and improvements for their clients or their team. And if the end result that they're looking for is kind of the dashboards and data and real-time insights, I think a lot of people miss that giant step in between of, okay, great, we've got all the data, but none of it talks to each other, and none of it is interconnected in a way that you can ladder it up to a BI tool or a reporting or a dashboard. And there's that giant gap in between that a lot of teams have to solve for, and I don't think they realize that gap.
You're not going to be able to do real-time dashboards if the data that you're pulling from is basically updated with a nightly cron job or something like that, right? Or if the data is dirty, or if the data is not fit to purpose for setting up basically a vector store or building out like these things that you need in order to be able to build the kind of automated customer services bot that you want to do with OpenAI on-prem. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of clean up your data infrastructure to get you to that point. So you're totally right, Justin. That's something that we can help with, and we love partnering with great people like Switchboard to be able to do that kind of work. Um, well, Justin, I'm kind of curious, is there any sort of trends that you're seeing with automation that people should be aware of, like new things that are happening in the space that's exciting to you?
I think there's the buzzword bingo right now of AI, and I think we're seeing things advance so rapidly that it's hard even for us to keep
Mhm.
up to speed with it. But I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing unlocked is just the advancements in the not even the models, but the APIs having, the longer context windows is a great example. We had a client where um, they had teams listening to their customer support teams calls to gauge for quality assurance and whatnot. And when we had first started working with them, we were building an AI behind the scenes or back end, taking all their transcripts, reading those transcripts, and running it against prompts for what they do and don't want to
Yeah.
see on calls. When we had started that project, it was a lot of kind of hacking together different models to read different parts of the transcript because you would hit context windows issues where the outputs from the AI would not be very accurate. It would either hallucinate or it would read half the transcript and then, run out of space, so to speak. I feel like I'm doing air quotes a lot, by the way, but we, when we started with working on that with them, we would run into all these challenges with context windows. And by the end of the project, the context windows had expanded enough that all of that was moot. And so with the trends I'm seeing in how teams want to use AI are exciting, but I think that there has to be the reality of, is it capable of doing all of that? But things are advancing so rapidly that, in the course of 3 months, something that we couldn't do or we could do in kind of hacky ways is now kind of done out of the box just by nature of the context
Yeah, and
windows
I think like
expanding.
to build on that, like a big trend that I see is observability and what do you do if basically someone asks a question and some weird stuff happens, right? So capturing that human evaluation and then wiring it up to basically a dashboard where someone can say, "Hey, this prompt was funky. I'm going to fix part of this system, and oh yeah, I'm going to write a test so that like it doesn't cause a regression elsewhere in the system." So people are looking at like evaluate frameworks and like how they test and basically operationalize their RAG pipelines. And then, as that data grows, right, you get into different situations like, hey, should I have a dedicated vet store like Quadrant, or should I try and build it into my existing Postgres database with PT Vector? Am I running this on a hyperscaler or is it in one of these, smaller, newer kind of like SaaS companies like Timescale? If so, like how do I actually tune PG Vector to be performant? How do I incorporate other, ranking systems? Like if I'm doing text search over basically this data, and then obviously stuff like privacy and things like that. So there's a whirlwind of innovation happening around basically actually taking this from a small prototype into basically these more complex use cases that are incredibly valuable to companies.
Yeah, and the cool thing is even just the advancements. I mean, we see OpenAI doing it themselves publicly and how they're talking about managing AI in your business. But the cool thing is even just being able to add in like Stack AI as a great kind of no code AI tool that we use. And because of the nature of the sheer amount of data that has to be parsed over, and you're looking for a certain output, the cool thing that I think a lot of people are seeing now that we're taking advantage of too is these kind of chain of thought prompts. And so before we get to the output, we kind of add these intermediary steps to say, walk through and ask the AI to kind of walk through what is your logic and what are the outputs that you're feeding into the final output that we're looking for. And the example of this kind of call transcript review, instead of just having the input being the transcript and the output being the analysis of that transcript, adding that intermediary step to say, walk through and outline what you're observing about this call transcript, for instance. And in doing that, that's where you can see where things are breaking down in the prompts and context windows might be hit or things like that. And it allows you to basically quickly improve the prompts and improve the way that the models are looking at these transcripts, and the outputs get better for it. So it's, yeah, the sheer amount of data that is being looked at by these models is just growing and growing, but being able to take advantage of things like chain of thought or multi-shot, where, you know, the final output might be after 2 or 3 shots, going through the transcript and iterating the prompts to improve it so that the final output is better. It's fun to do, but it's just wild how
That's
it all
pretty
works.
awesome, Justin. And you know, in terms of tools that are hot or things that you're seeing getting adoption, you know, do you see any kind of like things like, or do you have any thoughts on stuff like Clay? Any ones that you want to give a shout out to that like you've seen as being particularly useful for automating stuff?
Yeah, Clay is one that we use often. Partly because you can kind of have that. It's not quite chain of thought, but you can treat data enrichment and analysis of that data with AI as kind of a multi-step process. So you can have it, you know, all you have to do is feed it a domain name for a website to enrich some data, and have it go and look at the person's LinkedIn, the company's LinkedIn, their website, and kind of do all this separately and bring it back together, and then run an AI prompt against it to give you analysis of whatever you need, whether that's, you know, telling you about that person and their role, or the company and their services, whatever it might be. Clay is a good example where it's now all in a single tool that you can bring all that data together from different sources and then run AI prompts against that in a way that you see fit. And I think we'll see more and more of that across tools, because it's AI is unpredictable because of the way that it just kind of works as a black box. I think we'll see tools like Clay, or the way that Clay handles all this data coming together and
Hmm.
running prompts against it. I think we'll see that in more tools, and that's the reason that we love Clay. That's the reason that we love Airtable, because again, you can bring all these different data sources together in one place and then run prompts against it as you see fit. The other benefit too is you can now run different models for your needs. You don't need, you know, GPT-4 Turbo to do an analysis on a LinkedIn company description that
Hmm.
is 3 sentences long. You can use a much smaller model, or more of a local model that is kind of running in your own services, whether you're using Azure
Yeah.
or you're using AWS or whatever it might be. You don't have to rely on just OpenAI's, you know, expensive, most expensive models to run an analysis against something. You can use those when you do need to, and you need a longer context window, or you need, I guess, a stronger model to do analysis. But that's not necessary anymore with just the sheer ease of kind of interconnecting all this data and then running the right model that you
Yeah, and
need
for those
against
who
it.
don't know, Clay is a sales tool. So basically, you're taking a list of prospects and then you're often enriching them, which basically means like you're running prompts and like different tools that might go out and scrape for different information about a person and kind of cleaning them up and stuff like that. And you can do some really, really cool um, sales related kind of workflows with it. And it's gotten quite popular amongst all my friends who do sales engineering and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool to hear about. So, Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. This is a really informative episode. If people want to go hire you to automate, like basically parts of their sales process or, you know, any kind of onboarding or other stuff, where should they find you?
Yeah, our website's with switchboard.com, and then feel free to email me, Justin at withswitchboard.com, or find me on Twitter. I'll share the links
I'll
with you, or
put
well,
your
you have the
Twitter
links.
slash X kind of username and you know in the first few 5 seconds and in the show notes as well. Justin, so thank you so much and have a really great rest of your day. Bye bye.